To give a little bit of background information, this started in the winter of 2012. I was 23 years old at the time and living with my dad. My mom and my brother were living in another house about 10 minutes away from us. One morning, I woke up around 8 a.m. because I had an early doctor's appointment, and I went outside to see a note pinned to the windshield wiper of our car. The note said, "I'm going to kill you, fucking pedophile scum." I kind of just laughed it off. I assumed the note was for my dad, who had a habit of complaining to parents in our neighborhood about their children's shitty behavior. There were these twin boys who liked to try and catch and torture squirrels. He often marched them home by the ears to complain about them to their parents. I thought one of the parents was just being a douchebag, so my dad and I didn't bother with it too much. Later in the day, while talking to my mom on the phone, I mentioned the note to her offhandedly in a very casual way, and I was shocked by her response. She responded very emphatically, warning me several times to make sure all of my windows and doors were locked and to bring a weapon to bed with me at night. I was a bit taken aback because she'd never said anything like that to me before. She'd never even given me the good touch, bad touch talk. She reminded me at least 12 times over the course of the conversation to bring a knife or a baseball bat to bed with me and to lock my bedroom door at night. I thought she was just overreacting, so I waved her off. Then other weird things started happening. We started getting random packages and deliveries sent to our house. Bibles and Qurans, newspapers, porn flyers, pizzas, and moving trucks that we hadn't ordered. The first few times it happened, I thought it was a mistake, but as it kept happening, I came to the conclusion that somebody must be pulling a prank on us. We didn't really know who it was, so there was nothing we could do about it but apologize profusely to yet another confused pizza delivery man. In September of that year, I started taking a night school class with my best friend. The course went from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. every Monday and Wednesday night, and after the class, his mom would pick us up and drive us home. Sometime in November, his mom dropped me off from school, and I went inside and chilled on the couch for a couple of hours. I like to wind down before I go to bed a bit, or I can't sleep. I ended up falling asleep on the couch. Something woke me up abruptly at about 4 in the morning. I heard the unmistakable sound of a car tire being slashed. What the hell was going on? We didn't have any enemies. In retrospect, this was probably a stupid thing to do, especially considering that I'm a relatively small female, but I grabbed a generic kitchen knife and went outside to check it out. When I got outside, I discovered immediately that I was correct. There was a man in our driveway slashing our car tires. Unwisely, I immediately yelled, "Hey, you!" And he turned around to face me. That was when I noticed what he was slashing our tires with. An enormous hunting knife, at least 6 inches long. He looked surprised, but then defiant, and began to advance towards me with the knife slightly raised. I just froze. I didn't know what to do. He was coming at me so fast, I couldn't think. Thankfully, at that exact second, my across-the-street neighbor, who had also heard him slashing our tires, turned on his porch light and yelled out the window, "Hey, I'm calling the cops!" The man yelled back, "I don't give a fuck, call them then." But he quickly retreated back to his car, where I could see a middle-aged woman with long brown hair waiting for him in the passenger seat. Our eyes locked, and I knew instantly that we had met before. But I couldn't quite put my finger on when or where. I just knew in my gut that I had met this woman before. They sped off into the night, and we called the cops, who said they couldn't do anything for us because they didn't know who had done it. I called my mom to tell her what happened and to ask her if she had any idea who would have done this to us. She immediately said no, but there was something in her voice. I could just tell that she wasn't being honest. A few weeks later, I decided to go to my mom's house to spend a day or two there, determined to get some answers. As soon as I walked in the front door, I knew something was wrong. The second she saw me, she just started bawling her eyes out. She took me by the hand and sat me on the couch and explained the whole story to me, start to finish. It's necessary for me to give a little bit of background information here. My mother is a businesswoman by trade. She was still in sales at the time, but she's also a bit of a hippy-dippy astrology and pot and reincarnation and Mercury is retrograding, so don't get into any arguments this week type of person. On the side of her regular day job, she was also selling Arbonne makeup, which is an all-natural brand of makeup that is free of parabens, oils, sulfates, and other common cosmetic additives. A couple of months before this all started, she had ended up being referred to a new client named Andrea by her weed dealer. Yes, my mom smokes weed. This is Canada. Everyone smokes here. Andrea was her dealer's girlfriend, and she was interested in buying Arbonne. So, my mom invited her over to her apartment to look at some makeup samples. They started chatting a bit about a variety of topics, as women are wont to do, and my mom let it slip that her last name was Hayes. As my mom told me, Andrea had paused for a few seconds, looked at her, and then said, "Hayes? Did you used to be married to a man named Darren Hayes?" My mom answered that yes, Darren Hayes, my father, was her ex-husband. And then, shockingly, this Andrea woman had actually burst into tears, threw her arms around my mom in a hug, and begun to tell her this horrific story about all the disgusting things that my dad had done to her. Apparently, when she was 14 years old, she was now in her mid-30s. I would have been about 4 years old at the time. This would have happened around 1994. She had been dating a man named Andrew, who happened to be living with my dad at the time after my parents' divorce. According to Andrea, these men, her boyfriend Andrew, Andrew's twin brother Daniel, and my father, had taken turns beating her, raping her, and then forcing her to prostitute herself in order to make money off of her. Eventually, they ended up selling her into child prostitution, from which she said she never recovered. At this point, I realized that this is where I'd recognized her from. My dad had been roommates with her and her boyfriend Andrew, and I used to see all three of them when I went over there to visit him every second weekend. She sobbed inconsolably during the whole retelling of the story, telling my mother how after this traumatic experience she had turned to drugs and alcohol to numb the pain of her abuse, and that she'd been addicted to crack and alcohol off and on ever since because of what my father had done to her. My mom was shocked. She didn't know what to do. On the one hand, she knew my father to be a generous, soft-spoken, and kind person who had never lifted a finger to her or any other person, and who rarely raised his voice. But on the other hand, it seemed odd that Andrea would just happen to remember his name all these years later if she had been lying. She didn't know what to believe. After several hours of crying and much consoling on my mother's part, Andrea finally left. That was when the stalking began. A few days after this encounter, my mother came home from work to find Andrea's boyfriend sitting on her couch, waiting for her. He immediately told her that he was planning on killing my dad, that my dad deserved to die because he was a pedophile, rapist, piece of shit, and that if my mom told anybody at all, especially the cops, that he would be sure to kill me as well. He then concluded that his threat by describing the layout of our living room and exactly what outfit I was wearing that day. From then on, he and/or Andrea would text or call her several times a day to threaten and taunt her, telling her that they were going to call the cops on my dad and have him thrown in prison, that they were going to have him killed, that if she told anybody, they would hire somebody to rape and murder me. Naturally, my mother was absolutely terrified. She was from an upper-middle-class family who had immigrated to Canada from Germany. She had never dealt with this type of person before. She stopped eating, she couldn't sleep, and she even stopped going to work. She lost 30 pounds and her hair started falling out from stress. She started having panic attacks because she didn't know what to do. Later, she told me that she understood how I felt now because I have an anxiety disorder that causes me to experience panic attacks. Eventually, after the night when I almost got stabbed, she decided that she had to call the cops. She couldn't take the chance that they would hurt me. She had to do something about it. And what she found was shocking. Andrea was well known to the police. When my mom told them this story, she was so well known that they weren't even surprised to hear her story. In fact, they told her Andrea had done this exact thing to at least a dozen other men. She would meet and blackmail men into giving her money, electronics, drugs, etc., threatening to call the cops and report them for rape if they didn't. Her boyfriend, who was a dealer of other drugs than just weed, as it turned out, would often use his drug connections to intimidate and extort the men. And for some reason, he even never questioned her stories of being raped, abused, and enslaved by all of these different men. Because there is no doubt in my mind that he genuinely believed that she was telling the truth. Then when Andrea, who was on crack and heroin, and a prostitute, would get arrested on a possession or drug distribution charge, she would attempt to make deals with the police by offering them different information about men who were rapists and pedophiles in exchange for less time in prison. She eventually did this so many times that the police stopped believing her. After my mom called the cops, the whole story came undone, and Andrea and her boyfriend, thankfully, haven't bothered us since. But it's been over a year since the whole thing happened, and I'm still terrified to leave the curtains open at nighttime in case somebody is watching me. I don't think I'll ever be able to feel fully safe in this house again. So, Andrea, let's not meet again. Ever.